And hello and welcome again to another episode of the Civil War Regiments Podcast. I have a packed studio today full of guests and interviews and trying to pretty much stock up on some content going forward here. And I had the idea of inviting a lot of my friends at one day so we can kind of do 3 or 4 episodes and kind of get some inventory going. And so I appreciate it. I'm glad all you guys have made the trip down. So I got a couple of Tennesseans sitting with me right now. I got Whit Barr and Mike Hoover, and I think they're both native Tennesseans. Maybe we'll get to that. That's questionable, maybe. But guys, I thank you for joining the show. Welcome, guys.
Glad to be here. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Are you native Tennesseans?
Well, I am.
You are.
Yeah.
Mike?
My family's been there since about 1806.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then thankfully I was born there, but part of my mother's side of the family is from Kentucky, but born and raised.
Got it.
So for the most part, I have Tennessee roots, but I was actually born in Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I moved back to Tennessee when I was 6.
Oh, okay.
So my dad's got deep Overton, Fentress County, Tennessee roots.
Yeah. Good. So, well, there you go. There we have it. So that you've been in Tennessee long enough now. Yeah. So, but guys, I always start off any conversation with just, again, a little bit about yourselves and your background. And so both of you have been involved in the living history hobby for a long time, but where and when and how did both of you find your interest in history? And maybe Whit, we'll start with you, man.
Oh,
what did it all begin?
We were going to go with the more storied. When I was in elementary school, I was in a gifted education program, which for a lot of intelligent reenactors should say a lot about me, and maybe not positively. But in 3rd grade, I was studying the Civil War through this particular program 2 years in advance of when you would naturally learn it in the curriculum. And so that was very neat. And my mom, wanting to spend time with both of her sons, decided to take us to a reenactment at Shiloh in this 2001. And so we end up going, and it's pretty awesome because, at like 9 years old, you see a lot of dudes shooting at each other and no felony charges get issued.
Yeah.
That's like a pretty good time.
Yeah.
I kind of early on, I had a couple of friends that sat next to me in class, and they were just big hunters, big gun guys. And I always wanted to hang out with them, and I had this kind of interest in guns from them. And so going to a Civil War reenactment where there are thousands of them, that definitely perked the interest as well. And so, after that reenactment, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And so it's what I did. I had pieced together a kit through, my parents and people that were in, some of the early units I kind of ran with. The first unit I started with was the 1st Tennessee Company Aytch. And this was, at the time, it was run by a guy named, Weber Van Hudson, but Van Hudson's what we called him. And then I went to kind of a few events with them, and then they all petered out. The unit fell apart, and so I found other people like the 37th Tennessee, and then later on the authentic kind of sides of the hobby, going with like the Western Independent Grays and Armory Guards, the Independent Rifles, the Liberty Rifles, just running the whole gamut of everything, and being in just various messes.
Freelancing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the best way to do it. You've got friends everywhere you go.
Whit Barr has entered free agency again.
But that's the origin story there.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it all begins somewhere. What about you, Mike?
So in 92, my dad got transferred from Knoxville to Nashville. I really had no interest in history. And then right after we moved here, my parents took me to the Carter House in Franklin. Of course, there's bullet holes. The guy that was giving the tour was doing an awesome job to explain all that. So right after that, I was just hooked on. I went down all history. I loved it. I think in 5th grade, I put, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Civil War reenactor." So when I was 13, at the 1996 Nashville Civil War show that they used to have at the fairgrounds, my dad bought all my stuff in one
Wow.
just everything.
Yeah.
And to show you, how long ago that was, my brand new 1861 Springfield cost $415, which I should have bought more than one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you didn't know at the time.
kidding.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
I actually was in the First Tennessee Company Aytch before Whit was. There's kind of like a big
before
argument.
Whit, but after Sam Watkins.
Yeah,
That's right.
Right, exactly. There's kind of a unit split, and then we kind of went with another group. So I was actually out of it before Whit went in.
Okay.
But for a long time, I really wanted to get in the campaigner's side, but I didn't know anyone who did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the few I'd run into didn't make me want to do it. But I used to go to events and just carry all my stuff on my back. And then finally a guy named Bart Boaz joined our unit. And then he's like, well, that sounds really cool. I was like, well, let's just go join one. At least then we at least know each other. You know?
Yeah.
So we did Outpost in 2007. And that was just, I fell asleep standing up on guard duty Saturday night. Like, it was just the full experience.
Yeah.
Then after that, I was just hooked on them. I met Whit actually the next year. We did living history at Fort Negley, which is really close to downtown Nashville.
I just went there.
Man.
Yeah.
It has been cleaned up a lot.
Yeah.
Well, there used to be a lot of homeless people hung out there at night, which we didn't think about. So we woke up Friday night and there's homeless people around our fires, sitting on our boxes.
Oh, man.
So the next night...
Pick up some recruits?
Yeah. I'm like, yeah, we both like sleeping on the ground, you know?
Yeah.
The U.S. Army.
And that's when you guys met Chad Phillips.
So actually, that's how I met Whit the first time. Is we were both on guard duty Saturday night, trying to keep homeless people out of our camp
and out of the fort.
Out of the fort.
We and Baker Watkins and I kind of had to chase one out. That site was put up in the 1930s by the WPA, and some of the stonework at this point in time is not safe to stand under or be under or use as a shelter anymore. So some of it was to keep them out for their own safety. So we had a ton of them there.
Golly. It was nice. It was nice when I went.
Yeah.
I went in the morning.
They have cleaned it up a lot.
But it was pretty,
it was pretty overgrown back then, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Golly. Well, you touched on a good point earlier about how it takes a while to meet the right people in the hobby, too. And I was in the same boat for a little while. After a while, you start on your own, like you're sleeping on the ground more, you're carrying everything on your back more. And then all of a sudden you get the attention of other groups. Like, hey, man, you look like you're doing the right stuff. You should come follow with us sometime. Or, but there's something about, the authentic side of the hobby is small, but everybody has a different approach. Some guys are willing to kind of answer those early questions and help you out, and some maybe not as much. So it takes a while to kind of meet those groups that are willing to be patient with all your newbie questions and to get going. But you're in the group you're part of now is the Williamson Grays,
right?
Or is that your own personal group? Or
so the Williamson Grays were originally Company D of the 1st Tennessee. So after we split from the Murray Grays and Reenacting, a lot of us were from the Franklin area.
Yeah.
So that was the first Williamson County unit to leave for the war, so we just picked that one. Yeah, and that's what kind of started. We can get into it later, but that's what started me down the 1st Tennessee route.
We know the amount of messes that break off from each other is almost like denominations breaking off for each other. As frequent as that, right? Where it's like this group used to be with this, you used to be with that, you used to be with that.
Yeah,
but no, that's cool, guys. So both of you are pretty settled in Middle Tennessee right now.
Absolutely.
You're in the middle of, I envy it in the regard that, okay, I'm here in Birmingham and there's not too much, history. Birmingham didn't exist during the war, but you guys are so close to so many historic sites, battlefields, between Franklin and Nashville and everything. I mean, there's a lot. And I haven't even seen everything. And I've done a little bit. Earlier this year, coming back from a wedding road trip, I had a few bucket list things I want to see, like Negley and some things. I actually talked to Pat Lantrum, who's in the audience right now. And I was like, hey, I'm driving through, like, have any recommendations of things to check out? And it was St. John's Church, I believe it was. I went to go there and see some of the graves there. And then I went to the old city cemetery right next to Negley. So I didn't realize the Negley and the old cemetery were like right next to each other. And so I went wandering around the cemetery, and I had no clue, no idea that General Richard Ewell was buried in this place. And I was like, what? And I was like, I had no idea there was like a Gettysburg connection right there. And so I took a picture of the grave and
Spring Hill.
Yeah.
So he retired to Spring Hill. What
I had a friend who owns a desk
said.
of his from his farm in Spring Hill.
And then
The station actually in Spring Hill is called Ewell Station because
Really?
Spring Hill did not want the railroad to run through their town. So if you look at a map, it does a big like C shape around Spring Hill because he donated the land for the train station.
wow. Well, you see, I'm learning because like I had no idea that I didn't even know that he moved out that way afterwards.
Yeah,
So
he met his
crazy.
first cousin when he got wounded in '62, and sparks flew, and they got married. That's a true story.
There you go. Maybe this will relate to a portion of the audience here.
Yeah.
But no.
God, I hope not.
Well, Whit, you had told me something about you knew someone had he had a picture in that photo. What was that?
So a friend of mine in Middle Tennessee, his name is Scott Smith, and we were over at his house. He lived in an antebellum house kind of on the main thoroughfare through Spring Hill, 31, which now the house has just been trashed by some other business. It looks, they just painted all these kooky colors, and it's selling to just like antiques, I guess, but like not real antique. I don't know what it is. It just looks bad. But nonetheless, I was there for a party one night, and Scott's got this very phenomenal, eccentric collection of antiques. Like he's got pieces of silver that were Marie Antoinette's China. And then he's got some silver spoons that were made by Paul Revere's nephew, which in the silver spoon collecting world, that's apparently a bigger deal than Paul Revere's silver.
I wasn't born with a silver spoon in hand.
Well, neither, and not one that Paul Revere's nephew made, for sure. But he comes over this desk and he starts telling us about it. And he says, well, this sat on the farm, and it was actually out in a barn when I found it. And he said, I'd met this woman who lived there. She said, that's General Ewell's desk. And he said, well, what's going to prove that to me? And she said, well, in one of the top drawers, you would pull it out, and if there's a picture of this horse, that was his. He had that as the bottom of the drawer, and he pulls the drawer out while we're in there, and lo and behold, it's a period like a CDV of his horse.
Wow.
And so just very unique to that. Just odd happenstance.
Yeah, but then it's just amazing how. And that's another thing I'm starting to get into a little more is paying attention to these historic homes and houses now, and how all these hidden gems and hidden treasures and all these historic sites. Like I'm at a point now where I'm more like, okay, when I was a kid, I wanted to see where all the cannons were.
Oh yeah.
Battlefields. But now it's like, oh wow, who lived in this old house and what stories, are in here and what hidden artifacts are in these houses. And now it's more interesting, but we've talked about a lot of these Western locations and battlefields, but to go back a little bit about, so obviously you guys have portrayed soldiers of the Army of Tennessee and, the most, the biggest Confederate army in the West during the war here. And, you're portraying them a lot. But what is it about, the Army of Tennessee and in your opinions that kind of makes them intriguing to kind of learn? And, of course you're in the area where, you witness all these things, but also the importance of portraying these guys accurately. Like, the misconceptions that people have where, unfortunately, for the grand scheme of the public, they just see everybody as General Lee's Confederate troops and everybody's wearing that Richmond gray or whatever. And that's how everyone everywhere looked. But when you see a true Western Confederate unit, like you're seeing all these shades of brown and butternut. And, and there's something to me like, I'm attracted to that whole line of butternut versus the gray sometimes. There's something about it. I'm like, tell me about how that kind of means for you, man.
I think there's maybe not some of the kind of eccentricities that the A and V had. There's not like funky Zouave, uniforms in the lines.
Yeah.
There's not like a steady, fresh supply of kind of nice English equipment other than maybe leather gear, rifles, hats and stuff like that. But they're not getting that steady of a supply as compared to, units out on the East Coast for sure.
Yeah.
The battles, just taking a look over, like a Civil War atlas, for example. You look at the state of Virginia. It's just one big battlefield. Or Tennessee, it's kind of all spread out. They're covering broad swaths of land.
Yeah.
Marching long distances. Leadership is always, problematic. And these guys, I sometimes think this is where the heaviest fighting, happened for no reason.
Yeah.
But I've got 6 Confederate ancestors. All of them were in the AOT. My family just really bad about pack ratting historic stuff, thankfully. And so
all of them survive?
Pretty much all but one.
Okay.
So I've got pictures of every single one except the one that died.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's not only like an interest intellectually or maybe scholarly studying this kind of stuff, but there's also a family tie as well.
Yeah.
I've got family, like I said, that got there in 1806.
Yeah.
The church I go to today, in that will, they leave a lot of money to that church in 1806. So we've been in that same congregation. So there's just deep family ties.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of pride, in reading. I've got an ancestor that was in the 20th Tennessee that wrote the regimental history, which you covered very,
I'd like
very
to
well.
touch that a little bit.
I'll be light on it, so we can. I'll give you the time you want to ask questions about it. There's this sense of pride that these guys, went off and fought a very hard conflict in their home state, and then went back to work. And went back to tried to go back to their normal lives after the fact and rebuild, all the damage that had been done. It's a litany of different reasons.
Yeah. And what about Mike? What about do you have some thoughts even about just how to portray these soldiers, their appearance accurately, even too?
Well, a lot of it too you have to think about is the Western Army wasn't quite as successful as Lee's Army.
Yeah.
So
had their ups and downs.
So by end of middle 63, most of Tennessee's under Union occupation. So if you're in a Tennessee regiment, nobody's sending you anything.
Yeah.
I have a letter from, it actually ran in the New York Times. The 14th Michigan was stationed in Franklin and Columbia during most of 63. They were the garrison troops. They're at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, and they just so happened that during the ceasefire, they're across from a Franklin company. And they actually talked to the guys, and they're like, we haven't heard from home in a year and a half. The guy said, I told them about their moms, who their sisters were talking to, all that stuff. I mean, that's a year and a half. They don't know what's going on at home.
Yeah, that's insane.
So,
man.
But yeah, you just read a A&V account, and it you kind of just get the impression they just kind of had it better because they're more successful, so they weren't really losing their homes the way a Tennessean.
Yeah, they had it rough from the get-go.
Yeah.
These guys. Golly.
I mean, other states had that too, but Tennessee, I mean, almost as a whole is gone by 63.
Well, that just made me think of something where when I started reading deeper into history as time goes on, you're reading things, the grand scheme of campaigns and stuff, but like thinking about the Shiloh campaign, and it's kind of like how Tennessee was lost so quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And to me,
surgically,
Fort Henry and Fort Donelson were more impactful than people give credit and attention to. To me, losing Fort Donelson and Fort Henry and losing the river and losing Nashville so quickly had to have made a huge impact on everything there.
Yeah, Tennessee was making uniforms for all its troops until Nashville fell.
Yeah.
And then there goes all those factories that they have around Nashville that can't supply their own state troops anymore.
That was spring 62 or
February,
February. Around the same time. Yeah.
So I can't quote you the exact date, but a few weeks after Donelson fell, U.S. troops were in Nashville.
Yeah. Crazy, man. But no.
But they had a wider front to cover, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they got to cover the entire border with Kentucky. They can come in through even down the Mississippi, the Cumberland. All those are, boats can easily go down that.
Yeah.
So they've got to cover all of that. But all they had to really do is find one breach in the line, and then the rest of it was going to crumble, and that's pretty much what happened.
But,
Marching to Pennsylvania is not that big. It's not that big of a distance, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no.
Maryland's what, like
No.
12 miles at that point.
Yeah. Oh man. But you
Hard
know,
marching.
the Army of Tennessee, like, you know, we talk about how they didn't always they had leadership issues here and there, and
Oh yeah.
they also had a constant, you know, just like you had Lee, just consistent in Virginia, but like in the West, you had all these changing commanders, and you also have all these really rugged, hard campaigns back to back to back, you know, and it's like, I mean, Chickamauga is like, would you say Chickamauga is like the highest point in the Army of Tennessee history? I mean, as far as, it was short lived.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
short lived.
so.
It's
Yeah.
almost like,
It happened.
if I had to give a football analogy, it's like, you know, Georgia upsetting
Yeah.
somebody and then getting beat the very next week. Like you
Right.
beat Ohio State, and also
Oh, yeah.
the very next week you get upset by James Madison or something. And it's kind of like, it's just a bittersweet. Like all of a sudden you have this big victory, Chickamauga, and all of a sudden then the worst defeat
Chattanooga
ever
falls.
at Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Right.
That's crazy.
I love all the appointments of generals in the West. Like in Murray County in Columbia, where I live, if you head towards Mount Pleasant, there's a church that was established by the Polk family, and Leonidas Polk, that Polk family, is one of those generals that gets appointed, and I don't necessarily know was always as good as he could have been. You know, he's like West Point educated, but I mean, sticking him in command may not have always been a great idea. Maybe just Jeff Davis doing a favor for somebody.
Yeah.
But I think that happened a lot more down here.
Well, one story that always cracks me up is the post Chickamauga, like Jeff Davis tour.
Yeah.
Where it's like he just comes and be like, "Hey, everybody, listen to Bragg.
Yeah.
You know, be nice, get along." And whatever
just won
people
by
say
accident.
about Bragg or not, and everybody, like, what happens with the restructuring of the AOT right before the Battle of Chattanooga is insane to me.
Yeah.
Like moving brigades under different assignments, moving guys here that never worked together before.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, you know, how can that be feasible for anybody? And then I can kind of see how tensions rise like that. And I don't know, but
You talk about they do.
there's so many rabbit holes we can go in.
I know they definitely do an overhaul of the officer corps for sure.
Yeah.
'Cause a lot of times these guys would get voted into the position because they were the biggest guy who could just kick everybody else.
Yeah.
Or fight everybody else and win in the unit. Which when I go to these reenactments as an officer, I like to think that that's how I would have gotten in. Is that it would have been my ability to fight more so than my strategic prowess or organizational skills.
Yeah.
So
oh my gosh.
A lot of them were just, richer than the other people in their unit. Like, I'm
That
buying your
too.
uniform,
I would
so
do
you're
that
gonna
as
do
well.
what I say.
Yeah. I know, like, that's another topic we could go down. Unfortunately, in our hobby, there's just so many guys who they have no success anywhere else besides being a pretend colonel or general for a weekend, and
they only have as much
all the
power as
in
you
the
give
world.
them.
Yeah, I know, right. It's like, how do these people keep getting voted?
You're going to set your tents up over there, and it's like, the hell I will.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Put a gun to my head?
I remember one of the old mainstream battalion meetings I would go to all the time. Every time they would have their battalion elections every year, it'd be the same thing every year. But it'd always be this one old guy in the group. Before they would open the elections, this one old guy in the back, I vote that we keep everything the way it is.
Yeah.
And then everybody would be like, amen.
I have seen that.
Yeah.
I have seen that.
But it is kind of interesting how, especially in the authentic side, again, we could talk a little bit about the living history where, I kind of like how all these different groups from different backgrounds do mold together and work together.
Mm-hmm.
So we can be forming a company with Tennessee guys right next to Wisconsin guys, right next to Georgia guys, and then Texas guys all in one company, and how you have all these guys from different backgrounds portraying this certain unit. And so that's what's funny too, when you guys are unique because you're in Tennessee, but let's just say we have a Franklin living history and you have these company guys portraying Tennesseans, but then you have like the public doesn't realize that some of these guys portraying Tennesseans might be from New York or
Oh, yeah.
California.
So trust me, sometimes they do know.
Yeah. Oh, they figure it out quick.
Yeah, like I don't recognize your southern accent.
Yeah.
It's like as Minnesota,
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, it's kind of weird nowadays in Middle Tennessee. There are people that I know whose families have deep, rich history in Middle Tennessee, specifically in Murray County, and they'll have an accent that is completely washed out. There's no trace. And so, it's kind of odd thing nowadays.
Well, I have people tell me a lot that I don't have much of an accent, or like people think I'm not really from Alabama.
And then you're like, you're getting too familiar, man.
Yeah. But, going back a little bit on family connections, I know we could talk about so many of your ancestors, but to pick one, I think it'd be fun to bring up McMurray.
Yeah.
So William McMurray, your ancestor.
William J.
We'll
McMurray.
explain how exactly he's your ancestor and what he's the author of.
McMurray is on my mother's side. It would be my grandmother's great uncle. He doesn't have any children. There's no direct lineage. He is wounded several times during the war. I think 5 in total. He loses an arm, shot twice in the leg. I think shot once in another. I think he gets a neck wound somehow. I think he gets shot in the neck at one point.
Yeah.
And still has the energy to write that book. But,
the 20th Tennessee.
Yes, the regimental history of the 20th Tennessee, which you so graciously used as a reference for all of the material that you rolled out about that unit and its experiences during the conflict, which was very refreshing to see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But like one thing I kind of did where, McMurray's book is 400 or 500 pages.
At least.
Again, like so many of those regimental history. So it's kind of like what I did. It was like 150 page condensed version.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like every man's 20th Tennessee.
Somebody. Well, and that's a unit that's, I think a lot of people can relate to. I like calling it like an everyman unit, where it's just, it isn't known for a lot of weird, peculiar things. They are in the action or the middle of the action in a lot of different pivotal battles.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, eccentric characters like Joel Battle Jr.
Yeah.
Joel Battle, Thomas Benton Smith.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a number of these guys that are kind of,
and they're also young too. A lot of those guys. Well, not Joel Battle, but
certainly Smith. Yeah.
Like it's just amazing how, again, that's what makes them a perfect example because all these regiments in AOT went through the same hell as the others did. Like there's not really many. I think you can almost look in even some of the federal armies in the East and stuff where you could have some regiments that went through the whole war and didn't really get pushed around that much, or they ended up being reserved almost the whole war. But like, I feel like in the AOT, it doesn't seem like there's any regiment or brigade that was spared any hardships.
Exactly.
And so the 20th Tennessee was a good model to kind of just show you one example.
Sure.
Because to read their story, you're kind of understanding the entire AOT. And
I think McMurray explains that pretty well in his book.
Yeah, he talks about it. I think.
I enjoy that. I have met so many people who had ancestors in that unit, some that have served alongside mine. So I work for a bank, and we have a particular branch in Green Hills where the commercial lender or the commercial relationship manager there, he found out I had an enjoyment of history, and I found out that he did, and I brought up the Civil War, and he talked about having an ancestor that led the 20th Tennessee, and I said, "Oh, you don't say?" And he said, "Yeah, I was related to Colonel Battle."
Oh,
I thought, oh, well, then you've got 2 ancestors that, So it's interesting. I've met multiple family members of Battle himself. One, a very storied reenactor in Middle Tennessee history, which was Fred Prouty. And you talk about a guy who's just as much of a historian on the 20th Tennessee. That guy, he's got a lot of the background knowledge kind of covered on the Battle family, of course.
Yeah.
And he'll certainly give you all the sources. Incredibly nice guy.
Yeah.
But I've met other guys that had ancestors in McMurray's Company B. There was a Scott Guthrie, not Scott Guthrie, Todd Guthrie.
Okay.
That he had ancestors in Company B, and just a litany of others. So that's kind of interesting as well, getting to run into these people where the family didn't really ever move. or leave the state.
Yeah.
So,
wow. But on the other side of that, like I love when you meet people that are on, are keeping up with that knowledge, but at the same time, it's kind of like I had ancestors in the war, but like I don't have too much on them. I don't have any belongings, any stories, but I love it where you meet somebody who you end up like they're related to a famous colonel, famous member regiment, but they don't give a crap.
Yeah.
And there's like, yeah, we have an ancestors within the war, and or like long ago, our uncle sold off his jacket to an auction somewhere, or like
his sword at Christmas.
Yeah, and I'm just like, Dad, gummit, man, like you have all these, like I would like die to have some of these things.
No kid.
It just seems like I run into that a lot, where it's people that's like, either that or somebody's related to Robert E. Lee somehow, and I'm like, okay. I had an ancestor in the war. He was related to Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
I was in high school band with a guy. His last name was Lee. I won't mention his name, but his last name was Lee. He was from Detroit, Michigan, which I don't know that Lee's family relocated to, but he was very proud to tell me over and over again that he was related to General Lee. I thought, man, good for you.
Yeah.
I wish everybody were that kind of, that lucky. But no, I get that for sure.
Yeah. Well, who would you say? I mean, you touched on some, but like for either of you, like, we were even chatting before the show about meeting World War II veterans, but like, have you met someone who was related to somebody famous in the Civil War, like a famous general? Come across anybody like that randomly in an event or something?
General Schofield's grandson we used to do a lot with the Save the Franklin Battlefield organization, and I used to fold newsletters with him.
Really?
A direct descendant of John Schofield, yeah.
Wow.
He was born in Ohio, everything.
Yeah. I just, actually, I'm sorry, this has been probably 10 years ago now, but I did a live in history at Kennesaw, and I was taking the side road out of there trying to find somewhere to eat, and I drove past. There was this old house right there not far off the battlefield, and there was a marker beside it, an old white house, and I think there was like a gas station across the street, but I went over to look at the marker, and it was Schofield's headquarters, and it was for sale. And so I went to look it up later to find out whatever happened to that, but it was some house not far from Kennesaw where. But anyway, that just reminded me.
I was going to say at the Selma reenactment in 1999, they had the oldest Confederate widow. She was, at the time, I think they thought she was the last one. I want to say right after she died, somebody else came forward.
Of course. Yeah.
But she was late 90s at the time.
Golly. Yeah.
I mean, it was just weird to think, like, you were married to a Civil War soldier, and
yeah.
I'm born, I think like 120.
That was when she was in her teens, though.
It was, actually.
Well, I think Longstreet's last wife died in the 1960s or something.
Yeah.
Because in Longstreet's memoir or whatever, like there's a picture of her in this like 1950s back, and it's just weird to see like, wait, that's Longstreet's wife. Like, anyway, that was very common. It happened a lot, but
I just watched a video. I found it on Facebook. It's just a treasure trove of videos like this, but it was interviewing children of Civil War soldiers.
Yeah, I think I saw
two of them.
Yeah.
And I'll have to admit, they named both soldiers, I think. One was a Confederate Floridian, and then the other one, I think it was, I don't remember the Union father.
Yeah.
But I hate to say, like, they gave the blandest, like, details of all about those ancestors and gave very loose family stories about them. I thought, like, did y'all do like a blood test? Is there like a defined genealogy? Are you sure you're related to them?
Oh, don't take away from the coolness, man. I'm just kidding.
And they very well could be related to him, but they did a very poor job of convincing me. Yeah. I go, you were on this, like, the earth the same time they were. The Confederate veteran's daughter, I think was at least a little under 10, like maybe 8 or 9 when her father died. You think there'd be a little bit more detail kind of lingering.
Yeah.
Who am I to say? But
yeah.
I will say, just going along that lines of ancestors or, descendants who just could care less. I saw that and thought, it seems like they're real proud, but they didn't care enough to go actually do the research.
I know. Again, well, I go kind of back to what I'm saying. Sometimes like the people that are born into it or like have these great like they don't keep up with it as much as like if it were me, I'd be all over it.
Yeah,
you know?
to them, like that's just my dad.
Yeah,
I mean, he yelled at me a lot.
He had this 1,000-yard stare all the time, and we just never talked much. But you know, it's crazy. So I don't know where to go from here. But you know, to talk a bit about, you know, let's talk about some of these battlefields and historic sites.
Oh,
because you guys, you know, there's so many places that you say, but okay, let's just say, you know, for people listening, even, you know, who are sightseeing themselves in Tennessee, like what do you think are some prominent locations that people should be going to visit and check out, or maybe even some lesser known treasure troves that people.
Now, is this just in Tennessee, or is this like
let's say Tennessee,
Mid-South?
Yeah, let's say Tennessee, because you guys, this is your ballpark.
Absolutely.
I mean, Nashville doesn't have a whole lot left, but Shies Hill, I mean, you can still go see the works up on top of the hill.
That's cool. Yeah.
Fort Negley's right there. They've done a lot to revamp that park.
Yeah.
Redoubt number 1.
Yeah, Redoubt number 1's there.
Yeah.
That's the one I think that's
Claiborne's
right in the middle of a...
It's in Green Hills, yeah.
Yeah, middle of a neighborhood.
Really?
There's like
You
houses
drive by
on both sides.
And you're like, the developers didn't get that?
Yeah.
Wait, is that where that like soldiers monument is?
I don't... No. I know you're talking about that. That's not it.
It's a weird... I mean, it's not weird.
Comes out of nowhere.
There's this monument. Like I was taking the side road and I see this huge display monument, and it's artistic.
Yeah.
And I don't know when it was built. Like I couldn't really tell, but like I think it's either a peace monument or a soldier's monument, and it's just off a little side street. I think it's on the it's on the retreat route.
Yeah.
But
I know exactly which one. I think I know which one you're talking about. It used to have a real bad problem where skaters were getting some like real sick grinds in, you know, coating a Civil War monument in wax, and then light speeds, you know, grinding on these monuments.
Yeah,
but that one I went through as a kid, and it was just coated in skate wax.
Yeah,
which is a shame.
But, and Shies Hill, when I went there, I went to Shies Hill 2016, maybe, when I was doing that project, and I went up there, and it was in a nice neighborhood. But when I hiked up to the top, it's a steep little climb. But when I got up to the top, it had been vandalized. Like the cannon, they had a little tiny cannon up there, but it was flipped over. Like there were a couple of park benches were trashed, and but it was still there, and I'm glad that it's preserved at least right there. And I think that road right there is Benton Smith.
Yep, sure is.
Right, yeah.
And that's where, you know, of course, Colonel Shy was, I believe, shot in the head and killed. Right, you know, I mean, that fell apart pretty quickly. So, but yeah, what are some other little places?
I mean, most of like Hood's Tennessee campaign, I mean, a lot of the houses are still there. Like just in Spring Hill, Absalom Thompson's house, that was Hood's headquarters. It's still standing.
Yeah.
Rippavilla, where you had the meeting the morning of November 30th on the way to Franklin, that's still there. You can tour the house. They've got a small section of the Spring Hill battlefield preserved. But then even go up to Franklin, you can still visit the Carter house. You can still visit the Lotz house. I mean, that's right at the epicenter of the battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carnton, I mean, they still got, you know, bloodstains on the floor. Then, of course, there's also a massive Confederate cemetery that's there. So, and that's kind of a rarity. Yeah. Because most battles, you know, they were all just thrown in a mass grave afterwards.
A lime pit.
Yeah.
So for them to be preserved and actually, you know, have their names over on a marker is pretty rare.
Yeah. It's an impressive, I mean, I've walked up and down it before, and it's all plotted by state. Right. And I also went to that little cemetery where Todd Cotter's buried.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Rest
What's
Haven.
That one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the name of that cemetery?
Rest Haven.
Oh, Rest. Okay.
There's actually other kind of Governor Brownlow.
Yeah.
Post Civil War, he was a Union sympathizer during the war. Like
military governor.
I think he wrote the Knoxville Whig.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, he became governor after the war. His son was a colonel in the 1st Tennessee U.S. Cav. And he's buried in there because he married a doctor and Franklin's daughter. So he lived in Franklin post-war.
Wow.
Also, I know he made it to colonel during the war, but then afterwards, I don't know if he got bumped down, so don't hold me to it. But he was Colonel Grumman. He was in the 14th Michigan. He married a girl from Franklin, but he got killed by fighting out west after the war. but he's buried in Franklin as well, in that same cemetery with Taco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's two, like, Union officers, you know.
Yeah.
Just a stone's throw away from Todd.
I just found, like, I feel silly, and you'll probably laugh, but it's like, I didn't realize there was so much more at Winstead Hill.
Yeah.
Because I went before, and there's like a marker right near the road right there, and I thought that was the only thing. And not long ago, earlier this year, I went up there and I was walking around, and all of a sudden I realized there was a whole trail going up.
Oh yeah.
And then there's like 10 monuments on that hill, and I'm like,
that
whoa,
lookout thing too,
yeah. So I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh, there's like one for every state up here, and that was kind of neat. And I went up a little overlook.
Yeah.
You can't really see too much at the time when I went up there. It wasn't, the visibility wasn't, but they have a whole map up there of what the layout was, you know, during the battle and all that.
Yeah. I mean, for a long time in Franklin, that was the closest thing to a park they had. Like, that was the most amount. And then they had that Carter house for a while, but they had like the immediate yard.
Yeah.
So where all the works were, where there's like a florist, like 2 trailers. They didn't preserve all that until probably the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
So for a while, that's where they were. If you wanted a monument in Franklin, it had to go on Winstead Hill somewhere.
And that's a hard ground to undevelop or to restore. You know, like the flower shop that sat on, I mean, where Confederates are advancing right through the yard, when that sold and was demolished, and it was a 19th century house.
Yeah.
And so I think they had to pay 2.8 or 2.9 million for the house, not necessarily to just demolish it and get it back to, just to buy it. And, you know, from Winstead Hill to the Carter house, it is house after house after house after Taco Bell after house after house. And like the developers in Middle Tennessee have absolutely no soul. They've sold it off long ago.
Yeah.
And so that's a hard battlefield to get back.
Mm-hmm. But I am impressed with what's going on at Carter House, especially, and I look forward to some of the events coming up to attend there. And I remember I'm pretty sure both of you were there at the 150th Franklin March in Living History, where we all camped at Carnton.
Yeah. And
then they shuttled us to Winstead, and we marched from Winstead to the Carter House.
That was a good one.
And I caught pneumonia at that event. I was in the hospital for a long time, but my memory of it,
chafed.
Yeah, my memory of it though, that was it was kind of I don't know if something like that will ever happen again, but it's like, just seeing every traffic shut down for us to march down. Forgive me for not knowing the road names, but it's like we're marching down the Pike.
Yeah,
and then we go and turn. I remember we turned like we were going in the middle of a couple of apartment complexes, and then we right faced to go over this patch of ground that they had just cleared off. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of all this development, you see the old Carter house, and we charged up this little patch of grain
from the original patch.
And it was cool. It was a cool moment. It was like a short little 5-minute battle we did, but it was the first thing they had done in years there, apparently. And that was around the same time I was doing all my 20th Tennessee research. And so I was kind of I was thrilled to be part of that, but like to see how much has changed since that event is pretty cool.
Very different than when I was a kid, there was not, like, Mike and then Pat in another episode was saying flower shop trailer. I remember being at that event and seeing a 40-ounce beer bottle come over the fence from the trailer onto what aren't original works but are meant to look like them, I guess. But yeah, I remember just seeing like stacks of like 32-ounce cans and stuff. This guy he hated the Civil War, or maybe the Carter house, or maybe that there was the fact that people were always walking on the other side of his fence.
That
so much has been done.
That reminds me, and Pat's not in here at the moment, but there was that. I wonder if you guys were part of that photo shoot so long ago. Do you remember that presentation photo shoot?
Landrum was.
Yeah, where they were posing like as soldiers
on the original
in front
sites.
of like the Pizza Hut and all the things.
I remember that,
and they were professional photos.
Yeah.
I think they were in.
It was for Time, magazine, if I remember
for Time
right.
magazine, maybe. Yeah.
There was Rob Hodge, I think Brent Brown.
Yeah, that's right.
My brother Gene, Baker Watkins, Russ Dykes, and Pat Landrum that all did that.
Yeah. You weren't there?
I think there were some engagement. I was in high school at the time, I think, and there were probably some kind of event. I had like a band competition, or I had this school trip or this or that prevented me from going.
Sure.
But that
Yeah.
I wish I
cool.
could have.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. I can see it now. I remember Landrum's face over the fence line right there.
Peeking over a fence.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably in a neighborhood not too different from the one he lives in now, but thankfully not on a battlefield,
But no, it's encouraging to see the work that's being done. And so yeah, the more you say and mention, there is a lot that you can still see. There's still the risk of losing different things, but it seems like there's still an awful lot that you can go visit and check out. And it kind of amazes me how many of these old original homes are still, available to check out and see. Like all these old houses are still standing, are still being lived in, and that haven't been demolished yet. You know? And I know there's always some that are being threatened for new development, but it's kind of amazing to me how many of these headquarters houses and hospital houses are still there.
Yeah.
And that's a tour on its own, just to go up there. I'll have to go up with you guys sometime. And drive me around each of these preserved
show
houses.
You around.
Yeah,
I can take you to General Ewell's house.
If you want. Oh, there you go. Yeah,
it's still there.
Yeah, yeah, I can see it now. I want to see it. Should have gone over to the right. No, that's Hood.
Yeah,
another wrong. I've lost it. I want to talk about, especially you, Mike. We were talking about this earlier, but I think it's worth bringing up that you are you're very interested in Sam Watkins' story, and those of you who I think most Civil War people listening are familiar with Sam Watkins. He wrote the famous memoir Company Aytch. He was in the 1st Tennessee, and it may be the most famous diary of any soldier in the war, and if not just the Army of Tennessee. Thanks to Ken Burns.
Yeah.
You see, I always, I have both books. I have the 2 books that we're using that were All for the Union by Elijah Hunt Rhodes, a Rhode Island guy, and then Sam Watkins' Company Aytch. And both of those became some of the most selling diaries, for a while there. Maybe not as much now, but, back in the day, I remember when those 2 were just seemed like those were just the 2 diaries you had to read.
Yeah.
And so my memory is not too fresh on things because I read it. It was one of the first books I read when I first got into Civil War history. And so the only thing I remember personally is I wouldn't want to be Sam Watkins' friend because it seems like horrible things happen to people that like Sam Watkins or were around him. So
I would be Al Van Horsley, but that'd be about it.
Yeah.
I know he makes it to the end.
Yeah.
But before we give a consensus on the legacy of him and his work, can you give, for those who maybe aren't familiar with him, give us a little background on Sam Watkins?
It's a controversial topic. To give you some preface here.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was born, raised right outside of Columbia, Tennessee. It's actually an area called Cross Keys.
Oh, really?
The only store in Cross Keys is a store he mentions he worked with one of his friends before the war that ended up getting killed later on. He went to Jackson College. That was kind of a prestigious school in Columbia. So, he's well educated when the war started. He was clerking. He originally joined the 3rd Tennessee. They were called the Bigby Grays. And then a few weeks after he enlists with them, he transfers over to the Murray Grays, which ultimately becomes the 1st Tennessee Company Aytch.
Okay.
Serves through the war, gets out in 1965. I can dive into more of that in a minute. Afterwards, he starts writing just for the newspaper stories that eventually made into Company Aytch. He just starts.
When did he start writing?
I think it was 1880.
Okay.
It's about 15 years after the war ended.
That was published in a newspaper called the Daily Herald, which is still printed in Columbia today, but it's owned by Gannett newspaper or Gannett Media. But the editor of that newspaper was Al Van Horsley, who is featured prominently in that book.
Okay. And he served with Sam and Company Aytch.
He sure did. He was their librarian.
And the reason a lot of the stories in Company Aytch are so short, it's because it was written for a newspaper. Okay. It wasn't meant. He didn't go into that I'm going to write a book. He these would just appear in the newspaper.
Sure.
They even got traction when they're in the newspaper. I found a Detroit, Michigan newspaper reprinted Company Aytch.
Really?
It started kind of taking off. But a lot of it is his writing style. So first thing I'm going to say, when you're reading Company Aytch, get the one that I think she's his great-granddaughter, Ruth McAllister, put out. So he wrote Company Aytch, he published it. Obviously, people found criticisms with it. So he started correcting stuff. So she bought the copy that the family had where he was like crossing out stuff. He was going to reword it. Yeah. And his goal was to reprint it with these corrections that he wanted to make. He died in 1901. He never got it. He never published it before he died.
Okay.
But in that one, you could tell where he's like, you could kind of tell where people gave him grief about stuff. But a lot of the issues people have with him is you got to keep in mind he's more literary than your average, like an average soldier who writes a memoir is just going to tell you what he saw or how he remembers it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sam Watkins wants to kind of put you in his shoes. So he embellishes on details. And I think my favorite thing that he put in the second edition is in the original one at the Battle of the Dead Angle at Kennesaw Mountain. He said the Union Army came out 40 lines deep. They didn't really have 40 lines, but he clarifies it. He goes, it may have been 50 lines. It may have only been one. I'm just trying to tell you how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he wants you to be like, he just felt like the whole Union Army was coming down on him. He wasn't trying to tell you there was 40 lines of Federals.
Yeah.
So he embellishes on a lot of details because he wants you to, he's literary. He wants you to feel how he felt.
Yeah.
He even put a new intro at the beginning of the book that said, I never meant for this to be a unit history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where a lot of people, but the other problem with him is
so you're a Sam Watkins apologist. I'm kidding.
I think the problem with his, like, because I usually don't necessarily quote him in my research because I feel like I'd have to put too much of a, I don't know if disclaimer is the right word. Like, he doesn't really think there's 40 lines. But people who don't know about the battle would read it and be like, man, 40 lines, hit this. That's crazy. But then people like, historians read it and like, well, this guy's full of it.
That's why lines. You have to take every diary with a grain of salt.
Right.
It's just this one guy's condensed vision of what he went through.
But even then, like, it's going back to, he's trying to get you to understand how he felt, he doesn't really think there's 40 lines hitting the works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he does that in a lot of stuff. I mean, there's also some stories that he even said they're just kind of I don't know. It didn't really happen, but he's so like take the Battle of July 22nd outside of Atlanta. In the book, he says, I got promoted to corporal because I picked up a flag that 1,000 other men walked over. He got promoted to corporal after Missionary Ridge. He was a corporal before he got to the Battle of Atlanta. Okay. But the whole purpose of his story, I think, is people get promoted for stuff that's not, they weren't actually doing anything glorious. Mm-hmm. It just looks like they did because he has a flag at the end. So this guy got promoted.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of his stuff. Like, I know enough about the 1st Tennessee. I could tell when he's just making up a side story to kind of prove a point. And I could also, tell when, I mean, there's some details he gets wrong, but that's probably an honest mistake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was he 5th corporal when he got promoted?
No, he got 1st corporal.
I misread that. Okay.
Wow.
And then by the end of the war, he was back to being a private, but they had kind of too many NCOs and officers. So in 65, a lot of them were getting demoted back down to private just because, we don't need. At one point, the Rock City Guards, which were Company A, B, and C of the 1st Tennessee, they got consolidated because of their casualties, but they had 6 lieutenants at Kennesaw Mountain.
Yeah. Okay.
So you don't need 6 lieutenants for a company.
Yeah.
A lot of chiefs.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Maybe we ought to have these organizations and reenacting.
Another thing I get all the time is people say he deserted at the end of the war. So that stems from the 1st Tennessee, I don't know if you ever read a service record, but every 2 months you're supposed to get paid. And then there would be a roster saying where this person was and how much they got paid.
Yeah. So
the last one for the 1st Tennessee on file is February 1864. So unless you surrendered at the end of the war, you got captured, or you somehow got taken to a hospital that kept records, your record stops. So a lot of the guys that killed on the Atlanta campaign are just shown they're alive in February 1864.
Yeah.
So with his record, he never got captured or anything. So it goes from February 64, shows he's a first corporal, he's on furlough. And then the next thing is April 29th, 1865, he's being held in Memphis. And it says he's a deserter.
Okay.
So I think it was 1913, his wife goes for a pension. So they always pull your service record when they do that, because the Tennessee law was you had to have served through February of 65 unless you had a good reason to get discharged before then. Yeah. So all those guys that deserted after Hood's campaign, you didn't qualify for a pension anymore.
Wow.
So anyway, they pull his record, and it's like, well, it just goes from February 64 to April 65, and all of a sudden he's being held in Memphis, and they're like, and his unit surrendered in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Can you account for this difference? So she wrote it back, and then she's like, no, I know he was at the Battle of Franklin, well, all this. She's like, why would you think he deserted? Those records are wrong. And the guy even wrote back, he goes, I don't doubt your husband was at Franklin. I just have to account for where he was. Why is he in Memphis in 65 and not with his unit?
Yeah.
In April of 65, a guy from his company wrote an actual roster of everybody in the unit. It's even, a lot of it's in present tense. But he's like, he's at home. This guy's whatever. And next is Sam Watkins. He wrote, wounded at Nashville, said he was joining the cavalry.
Oh, okay.
His wife said later, he came home from Nashville and then bought a horse and told me he's joining the cavalry. So, I mean, we got two different people saying his goal was to go join the cavalry. But he surrenders, he's still in the 1st Tennessee. But he's also been shot 3 times at Nashville. So what unit's going to take a guy who's really wounded? So another guy testified he got put on light duty in Tupelo.
Okay.
And then I think he just knew after Lee's surrender and all that, the jig was up. And then he went to Memphis, turned himself in, and then went home.
Yeah.
But again, that's my theory. One guy testifies, last time I saw him was in 65, and he was in Tupelo on like detached duty, or I forgot how he worded it.
We know, in some fairness, I mean, I feel like the Army of Tennessee almost ceased to exist after Nashville anyway.
Right.
I mean, I know it was still structured, but it was just chaos afterward, right? Like I remember reading more or less that like after the retreat from Nashville and when they all come back to North Alabama around there, like when they are everybody recalled east. Yeah. It's kind of like as the AOT is marching through Alabama, through Georgia, like they're losing droves of the Alabama guys deserting or going home.
Right.
When they go through Georgia, droves of the Georgians are going home. And by the time they actually make it to like Bentonville, there's only like 3,000 or 4,000 men that are in the name of the Army of Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I think A.P. Stewart was commanding the last remnant in the Battle of Bentonville. But and if you want to talk about, I've mentioned this before, probably on the show, but like the most depressing order of battle I've ever come across is the like part of the Confederate Army of Bentonville, where you're just looking at these brigades that are like 200-man brigades, and then the regiments are the surviving men of like 12 regiments in one regiment. And I think that probably happened with the 1st and the 20th Tennessee for sure.
I think all the Tennessee units got consolidated into 4 different units, like in 65.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Was it like 11 or 12 of them that surrendered in South Carolina from the 1st?
The 1st surrendered in North Carolina, there was, so the 1st got merged with the 27th Tennessee after the Battle of Perryville because they had both taken so many losses. They merged the two. The 27th Tennessee had 60 guys at the end of the war, and the 1st had 65.
Wow. Well, I remember when I was reading into the 20th Tennessee that one of their companies had a contingent of galvanized Yankees. That's what they said at Bentonville,
Yeah.
which that's just so straight. Like right there towards the end, like guys they had picked up like on the way to the battle, and I think I thought the note said that they were still in their federal uniforms, just practically just falling in with them. Weird stuff in those final days, but you know, to kind of go back to a cap on Sam Watkins, is kind of like I know a counterpart, kind of similar book. I don't know, I was showing it to you guys earlier. This old book called The Cannoneer by Augustus Buell, and he was an artilleryman in the Army of Potomac. And it's a popular diary of an artillerist up there, but like apparently he was not at Gettysburg, but he's the guy who accumulated a lot of these stories.
But he knows
guys his pards. He knows guys that were there, and so he writes it again. It's almost like he's just sharing the stories that his buddies did, but he wasn't there, kind of thing. And so I guess in the sense, you know, it's not an official regimental history what Watkins was doing, but like he's still it's still a tribute to the memory of these guys and his pards.
Yeah.
And especially, you know, when so many of them died, you know, some of these stories are the only stories that exist about some of these guys, I imagine. But so yeah, what's the final legacy you think for Watkins, you know, as far as
I mean, in all honesty, it's a great book. There's a reason everybody quotes it, but like I said, there's some stuff where he just doesn't really differentiate between
the
fact that I would put in, like, you know, hey, I don't really, you know, maybe, you know, like I said, it may have been 40 lines, it may have been 50, it might have been one. I just want you to know how I felt.
Yeah.
So that's why you got to kind of read it from that mindset. You can't read it from a traditional memoir mindset of, well, this guy's telling me exactly what he saw. He wants you to feel how he felt.
Sure.
Did I remember there was a part where they're at Kennesaw, and he and another individual sneaked behind enemy lines and were defecating in Union soldiers' haversacks. I think that's what's called an haversack stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's happened to me before, unfortunately. That'll be on another episode.
Yeah.
But you know, as we wind down here, wrap up this episode, one question I'd like to ask you guys is, on that note of the diaries and books, like what are some memoirs, regimental histories, diaries that you guys kind of go to a lot or prefer? Do you think focus on the accuracy more, or, you know, something that you go to a lot? Like what are some of your recommended and favorite reading? There's too many, I know.
I'm sorry, they're all hitting me at once, but it's not necessarily one book, but you can get online by the Confederate Veteran Magazine.
Oh yeah.
Post-war. So that was started by a guy that was in the 41st Tennessee. And he actually kind of started it as his apology for not doing more during the war. Oh, wow. He deserted after Nashville. He like openly admits that in his memoir. He said, I just went home and went back to being a schoolboy.
Wow.
But he kind of felt bad later on that he didn't do more during the war.
Yeah.
So he kind of created that magazine. But I mean, guys just wrote in just random stories, like, you know, one of my favorites, a guy from the 1st Tennessee wrote, they were parked next to a wagon, or train. I think it was in Bristol when they were coming back to Tennessee in 1962. And they kind of peeked in one of the cars and saw there were barrels in there. So they got an auger and went under the bottom and drilled a hole in the barrels, and they found molasses in one and whiskey in the other.
Oh, wow.
So they just mixed the two and apparently had a great time that night. But it's just that kind of random stuff. I mean, there's stuff about battles too, a lot of it, and obituaries, but it's free online. So
that also reminds me of the Southern Historical Society papers.
Yeah,
that's another one kind of similar. And I love the online resources, man. There's just so many. It's amazing a lot of research I do that I could just do from home.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's gotten easier.
It's great. It really is. But what about some, you know, campaign studies of some of these campaigns, Franklin Nashville campaigns? What do you think are some of the better go-to books to kind of learn more about Middle Tennessee and the Civil War like that.
Man, we got Pat Landrum in the audience. I think he could have some pretty phenomenal recommendations. Boy's well read.
Because I know, like, Embrace an Angry Wind has got kind of a lot of errors in it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, love him or hate him, but Jacobson's book on Franklin and the Middle Tennessee campaign is pretty solid.
Eric Jacobson's books. He's done For Cause and Country. Yeah. He's done a few. And then Lee White just did one, right? He did one on Franklin recently.
Jamie Gillen's book, 25 Hours of Tragedy. And it's about the battle, basically what the debacle at Spring Hill.
Okay.
That's really well researched and written.
Yeah.
I was going to say, any of Lee's works are pretty good, actually. The Chickamauga campaign's pretty phenomenal.
Well, here's one final thought then. Do you feel like there's something that hasn't been written about yet that should be written about any of these topics we've talked about? Or something that you personally like to see somebody do?
I think a lot of them all have been covered to some extent, but I feel like Stones River doesn't get a lot of the credit for how bad it was.
Yeah.
I actually transcribed documents for them that they have in their regimental files.
Really?
Which, funny story with that, they asked me like 3 times, can you actually read cursive, because it's not taught anymore.
Yeah, I can read cursive.
Hold on a second. I thought this was
Here, move the
story. Mike needs to be the one. Mike had a great story about cursive handwriting, and then one of these guys in his unit, I thought would just be...
So he never learned cursive or whatever. So just to mess with him all the time, I'd write him notes on what we needed to do the next day in cursive and hand it to him and see if he could figure out what he needed to do.
Then when he graduated,
he
wrote him his congratulations letter all in cursive, and he's like, if I could read this, I'm sure it has great things in there. Guess you'll find out.
But I mean, there's like a lot of letters I've transcribed. Like there's one guy, he's a federal soldier that actually wrote, he's writing this guy's sister to tell her that her brother got killed. And then he said he was ready to make peace with the Southern Army. Like he was done with it after seeing that battle. He didn't want to fight anymore.
Wow.
But I think Peter Cozzens has got a book on it.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
But I don't really feel like that's a battle that gets touched very often.
That's where my sister fought there, and with the Eufaula light artillery. Stephen Lunsford was his name.
You don't say.
So, yeah.
It's always struck me really weird that there's not a book on Lucius Polk.
Oh, man, the better of the two.
Now, Pat just said there should be one on Lucius Polk, a book. And the funny thing is, I do know, I remember Civil War Times did the whole article on him, and he got on the cover of Civil War Times. I have that issue back in there. I remember there's a cover of Lucius Polk, and I think it's like the other Polk is the article or something.
I hate that he's called the other Polk. I hate that so much. He's such a better commander.
Yeah.
And he stayed intact the entire way through the war. One piece.
Fortunate.
A couple missing parts.
Yeah, but I mean, like, for the most part, it was contiguous at least.
Yeah, it wasn't missing.
Oh, man. But... dudes, thank you guys. There's so many rabbit holes we could go down and talk about Tennessee topics like this, but thank you guys for sharing these stories. It's good. I love the whole Watkins saga right there, so that's great. And so you condensed that pretty good too.
Oh, thanks.
Bravo.
Let's go. I could go page by page.
It's a really controversial reading. He de-escalated a lot.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe somebody learned a lot about Sam Watkins today. So, but thank you guys. Thank you all for listening. There's still some more recordings ahead, but stay tuned for more episodes, more content. But again, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Whit. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Steve.
No problem.
Take care, everybody.